Hello there, and welcome to Gooner U, where there are no degrees because the learning never stops. I'm Dove, a TA here at Gooner U, and my friend Keith is our stalwart distinguished professor of Arsenal and football studies. Enter our classroom as we discuss the week's news involving Arsenal, Premier League, Champions League, and international football, all from the perspective of a couple of Americans. This week featured home matches against Monaco in the Champions League and Everton in the Premier League. Hello, Keith.
Hello, Dove. Did you enjoy watching the Champions League game without me this week?
Oh, without you? Uh-oh.
Yeah, I've seen the highlights, and there were highlights. But I didn't see any live goals this week, which is unfortunate. Little automobile dust up, but I'm fine. That's the important thing. And winning was a nice little cap to the day when I was otherwise occupied. But,
as it can be, yeah, that's good. And yeah, well, so yes, I did watch apparently without you, and that was definitely the more enjoyable of the two matches of this week. So it's got that going for it.
Those are fun, as we like to say around here.
Yeah, exactly. So before we move on, just a couple quick things. So for one thing, it's been fun. We just had this past week our second Keeper 101 session. So the kind of, I don't even know. It's the Hudson Valley Youth Soccer League, I think is what it's called. But it's like the organization that our league belongs to. They're like the broader league in the area. They've been holding some clinics over the winter, and so one of them is focused on just keepers, and that's been really cool. I mean, I think ultimately at my son's age right now, like a little over like 7, almost 8, I think I'm possibly getting more out of these classes than he is, just on the sidelines watching and literally taking notes and like writing down the things that they're doing, because as we may have talked about before on the show, I am already doing my own keeper training of him and whoever else wants to join after matches in the spring and the fall. So I'm learning all kinds of things that I should be working with them more on, which is really good. So it'll be more useful to them. I suggested at some point that they have keeper coach training to teach everybody like myself who wants to be training young keepers, what we can be imparting to them. But hopefully I've picked up a few things for myself as far as being a keeper and also training keepers. And I have a new set of gloves on their way because my old ones have worn out. So
well, that's good. That means they're getting use. Yeah. Excellent.
Yeah, they're also, they kind of started wearing out the very first day. Like it's just like the flaky foam that they're made out of, just pulling on the hook end of the Velcro fastener. Yeah. That alone started to deteriorate them noticeably. So
yeah,
Yeah, but no, there's some interesting things that they've been talking about. I mean, just as far as body positioning, protecting yourself. And it's so funny because a lot of these things that they talk about in the classes, I think, yeah, that is a really good idea for someone who's like 8 to 14, 15, 16 years old. But it's like so much of it, though. You see the professional keepers that I'm watching with the Arsenal matches and MLS and international soccer. And it's like, I don't see a lot of this going on in practice, where they're just kind of like up against such a high level of competition where it's sometimes the fundamental, like, for instance, they taught diving actually at the most recent session and did it in a really, really good way. Cause I know like my son was very hesitant to ever try diving. Whenever I've tried taking shots for him that are far enough away where he would have to dive to get him, he just lets him go by. He just doesn't want to jump and get it on the ground. But I start off from a seated position and work their way up to kneeling and then kind of standing and work their way there. But one thing that they talk about that I don't remember ever seeing a keeper do, and it's really smart as far as not hurting yourself and also keeping control of the ball as you go down, is they say to lead with the ball, and you like kind of press the ball into the ground, and that's what you land on instead of landing on like your arms, your elbows, instead of anything like that. So you're not going to get hurt. You're protecting the ball, have one hand behind the ball and the other one on top of it. And then like the ground is your third hand, all kind of keeping the ball secure. All really makes a lot of sense. But again, I don't remember ever seeing that. It's funny.
So I've been thinking about this because we've had, and I promise this will connect, because we've had this conversation about how much rotation we've seen on the side due to injuries, but also fatigue, right? Certain players need to be there for, need some time or this and that. But the one player who has played pretty much every single game for various reasons is David Raya. And in a lot of ways that it doesn't seem that unusual. The keeper doesn't run around in the same way, so he's not fatiguing himself in the same manner. But the physicality of his position is very different because in a lot of ways it involves the kind of thing you're talking about, basically flinging yourself around. So there's an element of the physical damage being done to your knees, just your legs and sort of the movement, like you see with basketball players, right? All the jumping, but also just the physical, like crashing into the ground or into other players in a way that you don't really do. You don't do the same way if you're running around. So, but I do think as you watch there physically that you feel as though you don't see that. And I think there's two reasons for that. One is I suspect a lot of what they're doing with the kids, it deals with the fact that because they're younger and their bodies are still developing. And so, so now that they're, as Raya's, an adult, he is, hold on, he's 29. So, he's obviously much more physically fully formed. His body is more able to hold up to that kind of physical pounding. The other thing it's meant to do is, like any drill, is it's meant to create sort of reflexes. Right?
Habits, yeah.
Yeah, the reflexes and the habits. So you may be looking at it and you're saying, like, oh, they've used the ground as a third hand to trap the ball. And you're saying, I don't really see that. I mean, partly because they're not in those positions, but probably I would bet if you were to spend a lot of time watching the way their hands are moving as they go towards the ball, I'd bet you see a little bit of that as well. So again, as you get to that age and that professional level, the habits are ingrained, but you also have to now take that next step and say, okay, what do I do with the situations that don't fit the drill?
Well, exactly. And yeah, definitely. Like you're seeing an idealized form of this where it is like 3 to 4 feet away from you and you're able to reach it cleanly with time because it's going slowly enough. Yeah. Right. There are definitely some differences there. Related to what you were saying, something else was interesting, and I wanted your take on this. The lead instructor was pointing out that to him, the keeper is actually usually the most athletic. I forget if he used the word like fit, but like the most athletic of all the players, just because of the difference in terms of what is required. Not just the like flinging yourself around like you were talking about, but also doing that and then having to get back up like immediately and just getting down and back up over and over again as quickly as possible, because as we've seen sometimes that can be the difference between actually keeping the ball out and only temporarily saving it.
It's definitely a very different kind of athleticism than you see from others. I have heard that not so much with soccer, but hockey goalies, because everyone looks at hockey goalies and thinks, oh, they're slow and lumbering. No, those guys are absurdly athletic. They're very flexible, because you think of all they have to do with the pads on. And then hockey, especially the same thing, going down, especially because so many of them now play, they call it the butterfly, which, I mean, they've been doing it for 30 years, but where they drop to their knees and that way, and then pop right back up. And it is incredible to watch them sometimes just to go down and pop up and down, and just think about the hips and all that, and what just the kind of muscles you have to have in that part of your body to do that. But I do think I don't know if I'd go so far as to say it's more athletic, because I mean that depends on how you define athleticism, right?
Right.
But I do think they have a very specific kind of athleticism that just is so different than what so many of the other players have, because their job is so different. Their role is so great. Oh,
definitely. And I think if you were to make that argument, I don't know, as he was saying it, I wasn't so sure that I necessarily agreed with it. I get the spirit of what he's saying, but I think if you were to make that argument, I think it would be more of your body needs to be in good shape to be effective as a keeper than for an outfield position, just because it's really, and you see this with the injuries that they get, Mikel Merino's arm thing aside, it's all leg injuries. They're basically running and kicking, and that's almost it, So.
Right. And it's a lot of and again, I think their athleticism is probably more closely matched like a basketball player, if you think about the idea of the movement of the arms and, like we said, the jumping and all of that. So it's a different kind of thing than you see with others. So yeah, it's an athleticism up here. I mean, think about like the strength of the hands and the wrist it takes when the ball comes in. So, because essentially they are using more of their body, so more of their body needs to be in that kind of better shape.
Yeah, exactly. All right, well, enough Keeper 101 for now. What is going on? We talked last week about the results of the women's NCAA finals for soccer. You said men's is coming up soon, right?
Well, the what they call it, the College Cup is ongoing on Saturday. Were the semifinals. Marshall defeated Ohio State. and Vermont. The University of Vermont defeated Denver. And so it'll be Marshall versus Vermont for the national championship tomorrow, Monday evening, in Cary, North Carolina, broadcast somewhere on ESPN, one of the various ESPN networks. Marshall won a title a couple years ago because they were, men's soccer, soccer in the American collegiate system is a fall sport. During the COVID year, they held a spring season. So they did everything in sort of the, February, March, April range. And Marshall actually won that national title that season. Vermont, on the other hand, is a massive shock. They're a small public university. They play in the America East Conference, which is full of a lot of small public schools in the Northeast. The fact they're in the national championship game is pretty crazy, and good for them for getting this far. They won I think it was a shootout they won in the semifinal. So yeah, lots of green. The Marshall Thundering Herd and the Vermont Catamounts for the national championship tomorrow.
Cool. So that is going to be effectively today as you, dear viewer or listener, are encountering this. So that's Monday, the 16th of December. So, So getting to the week's matches, as we record, this was 4 days ago now when we went and played Monaco. I was going to say went to Monaco because I always think of it that way, although no, this week we had 2 home matches. But Monaco came to us in North London, and we had another victory in the Champions League, so that was good.
Yes, which is more than certain other clubs Manchester City can say. Yeah, we can get into that later. Wow. But yeah, this was so. As we mentioned before, I didn't see this one, so let's try something. I'm going to describe to you what I think happened based on watching the highlights, the 10-minute highlights from Arsenal, and then reading some of the post-game commentary. And I'm kind of curious if this comports with what you saw. From the sound of it, 3-0 is a fair score based on the flow of the game, all things considered. But really, it was 1-0 at halftime, and probably should have been a lot more than that because it looked like we goofed up several chances.
Yes. So far, so good. And the most frustrating thing is, I think at least 2 of those chances, because there were 3 altogether that I'm thinking of, but one of them may have been in the second half. At least, my notes do say actually 3 of them in the first half were 1v1s. 2 were Jesus, 1 was Odegaard, where they beat all the defenders and it was just a 1v1 against the keeper. And they just couldn't get it in, which is frustrating when you see that, especially from players like Jesus and Odegaard, who are players who should be able to capitalize on that and just couldn't. And you don't want to take that for granted. And like we don't. When we've seen like Havertz, I think, was a recent player who did take his time, keep cool, and chip it over or whatever he did. Like when we do see them convert those, you don't want to take for granted that they're going to score from a 1v1 because it is definitely difficult. It is not a gimme, but it is frustrating. You see 3 of those and we don't convert any of them.
Yeah, I mean that's a bit more context dependent, and then we've talked about this, right? Like it's not necessary. Not all situations are the same because not all players are the same. And as you watch them come in, I'm less surprised that Odegaard didn't convert. An excellent player, but doesn't have the same kind of goal scoring touch. That's not his role necessarily. Then I'm certainly less concerned with Odegaard missing than I am with Jesus, because again, he, as a goal scorer, or theoretically a goal scorer, it's been a while. Those are the chances you have to convert, right? That's your you were on the roster to help score goals. And so, but I will say this, because we've kind of talked about this a little bit. Jesus is a guy who's clearly been dealing with a lot of confidence issues. Obviously, hasn't scored in a very long time. Some of that was injury related, but still, it's been a while since he's gotten a goal. And I guess as frustrated as I am to see him not score, I'm happier about the one thing that makes me happy about seeing those highlights is seeing as a guy who's still not afraid to take the shot.
Right.
Because you'll see that, right? Guys they feel they're snake bit and they start to pass up decent opportunities because it's in their head they can't do it. And I maybe, I don't want to say I saw that necessarily, maybe in Fulham or some of the previous games, but it did feel a little bit like Jesus just wasn't quite there, and you made me wonder about his confidence. But to see him find himself into these positions, and I feel like the highlights had one or two other chances too to take the shot, even though it didn't go in. As a player who's, again, is a thin line between is he pressing to do something and that's why he's screwing up, or he's just off and he's trying to keep his confidence up to convert those opportunities. I don't really know, but it's obviously it's very frustrating, for a guy like that. Especially as we enter this period where we've been struggling to score goals. Certainly, it feels that way.
Yeah, and so I mean, some other things there. So when Saka did end up scoring our only first half goal, that was a good run of play, and Jesus was the last contributor before Saka scored. Jesus made the cross that Saka tapped in for the goal. So he did end up with a goal contribution, which is good. You hope that might help his confidence a little bit. And overall, what was kind of funny to watch as this match unfolded is, we talked last week about Stoke FC, right? About only scoring from set pieces last week. And clearly that's been buzzing around everyone writing and reading and talking about Arsenal the last week. And the commentator, and I do say commentator because I'm pretty sure this match on the Champions League only had one commentator. There wasn't a pair like you usually hear.
It sounded like on the highlight it was just one guy. Yeah. Yeah,
I'm pretty sure it was one guy the whole time. And he had mentioned early on, I guess it must have been in a pre-match press conference or something, but someone from Monaco was talking about that they specifically have been warned, do not give up frivolous corner kicks. And they didn't. They didn't give one up the entire first half. And I noted when the first one happened, it was the 58th minute, well into the second half before they conceded a corner kick. And, we didn't end up actually scoring from corner kicks because that was taken away from us. And we did still, make use of eventually some opportunities and score 3 from open play. One I can't wait to talk about because this it was so fun the way it unfolded.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I guess now's the time, may as well. But basically, the second goal came, with maybe 12 minutes of regular play left. It was getting toward the end of the match. It was a little nervy because in the second half, Monaco came out hard. They had found another gear. They were really pressing hard. They were giving us a run for our money. We seemed just kind of aimless and not knowing what to do with the ball, not really generating any meaningful chances. And we ended up with, it wasn't looking good. Meanwhile, we had some key subs. We had a triple sub that happened in the 64th minute, and then Havertz came on in the 72nd minute, and it was only 6 minutes after Havertz came on. It was the combination, all those subs really reinvigorated us. It's like the energy level kicked up. We were back in it. It felt different. And it was in the 78th minute that Havertz did what we've talked about before. And we've asked, why do they run at the keeper? They know all he's going to do is punt it up the field, not literally a punt, but blast it up the field, up what do they say, up Route 1, right? That they're just going to blast it away. There's no point in doing it. Well, he put pressure on him, and for whatever reason, I don't know if it was his positioning, like where he came from, somehow Kai Havertz caught the keeper off guard. The keeper panicked, tried to pass it to his teammate, a defender, like who was inside the 6-yard box, not realizing Saka was right there on him, basically passing it to Saka in his own 6-yard box. And Saka was like, thank you, and put it in the back corner of the net. And that was goal number 2 from Saka.
Right, yeah, and we've talked about that, and we have talked about this, right, that you put the pressure on it, because in most cases, right, he's just going to punt it away, but what about that time he doesn't? And you saw there, right, he makes the pass, and Saka's tracking the center back there. I mean, typically what you see is the keeper there, and you see the center backs dropping deep, and so they're essentially a little parallel with each other, and they kind of pass it back and forth to see where the best route upfield is. In some ways, what you see there is essentially a trap. Now, Havertz comes at the keeper, and they've probably seen something where they know the keeper, if he's pressured, will generally go one way or the other, or because of how you come at him or when you're coming at him, these are the patterns they're running. So Havertz runs and puts the pressure on, and the keeper does what he would normally do to release pressure, where he goes to the center back. Except Saka's coming in on the center back, gets him, and there picks off the ball and is able to make the play. It could very well be that had Havertz come forward and the keeper, same thing, but if he clears it to the other center back, you don't even notice that Saka's made the run on the center back, right? So it's one of those things, because of the way it worked out, you see it happen, but you may not even have noticed it. But that could be that's the kind of thing, like they talk about watching tape and stuff. Like, what are the tendencies? Right. What are the frequencies? Are there patterns of play to what they're doing? And so you design, a situation that you can deliberately disrupt their pattern. And that, I think, is probably a little bit what happened there. Or maybe he did just panic. I don't. Maybe he did.
Yeah, could be a combination. And like you said, even if he did panic, I mean, if they did position themselves that way on purpose based on knowing what he did, then brilliant. I mean, it definitely worked. So,
right. I mean, you see that too. Again, it's Sunday, so watched a little bit of American football today, and they talk about the quarterback who deals with a blitz, right? A defender comes, and part of what you do is, it's not even so much that you get to the quarterback, but all you do is, I think the defense is going to do this, and all of a sudden they do something different. And you have to process very quickly what's happening and make a decision. And sometimes it's designed that way. It's you blitz from a certain direction to force the quarterback to throw a different way, but you prepared for that. So there's a lot of that too. We don't see it as much. Americans, I don't think we especially feel that as much, because we see soccer as a game of perpetual motion, and it obviously is. But there's a ton of that kind of intricate tactical decision making going on. Not even if it doesn't feel like the same kind of set piece play. Like in an American football sense, where everyone's got a deliberate route to run. But we've seen some of those, like the kickoff setups, obviously are set pieces. Those guys, we see some of those kinds of things. So,
yeah. One thing I forgot to mention too with this match was Miles Lewis-Skelly. We talked last week about should he have started instead of putting Partey in at right back and then shifting Timber over to left back, where he wasn't necessarily entirely comfortable. They started him, and actually we'll find out with Everton, they started him in both matches this week. So that was good, and he was the secondary assist on that first Saka goal too. So he had a role in the build up. So
yeah, and he is subbed off in both games, which I think we talked about this with Wanyeri too. There's a physical development necessary that he doesn't necessarily have perhaps yet, and also it ended up being 2 games in a week, which is. It's a lot to ask of some of the more seasoned professionals, and certainly a lot more to ask of an 18-year-old. But good for him for getting the 2 consecutive starts and in the Champions League as well. So
right,
between him and Wanyeri, we have a couple of there's some interesting potential in this out of the youth in the club. So it's exciting to see.
Yeah, definitely. So the third goal that was right up toward the end in the 88th minute, that was also from 2 subs helping out Marino and Saka. Trossard had the initial pass that kicked off the sequence that ended up with Saka basically scoring, but Havertz kind of got a toe on it and kind of gave it the little push. I'm not totally convinced that it wouldn't have gone in if it weren't for Havertz. If for Havertz's touch, I think Saka might have gotten it anyways, but Havertz made sure, and so I think that ended up going to Havertz. But Saka was so close to a Champions League hat trick on this one.
Yeah, I'm not mad at Havertz, obviously, but yeah, it would have been a great moment. It seems like it's that we'll talk about this in the aftermath of the Everton game. Like it sort of feels like Arsenal can only score on a set piece or when Bukayo Saka does something amazing. And it's not as much of a criticism as that is and sounds like. It's nice to have a guy like Saka who can do amazing things, and he is definitely. We've talked about this with Jesus, right? He's a Champions League player. That there's something about that stage and that moment that he's comfortable with, he's better at, and he elevates his play to the moment. And Saka is very clearly that guy. Like he clearly is able to find that extra gear and seems to enjoy the Champions League setup. We talked about that with Jesus, right? He seems to in the Champions League, and some of it may just also be the way he's played. The kind of competition the quality. Not I wouldn't say the quality of the competition necessarily, but the opposition, but also, the kinds of things that opposition does. We'll talk about this with Everton, right? The thing we've struggled against so often in the league are teams that pack it in, that park the bus, that put men behind the ball. You don't see that as much in Europe. Although, look at the one game we lost in the Champions League. Who was it? It was Inter Milan. What did they do? They scored a goal and they packed in the box, because that's what they do, and they're very good at it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. So before we move on to Everton, one quick question. I was seeing as this match was going on that they were referred to as AS Monaco FC, and it was just kind of interesting because I wasn't exactly sure what it stood for, and you don't usually see, or at least I don't, like a 2-letter abbreviation, a word, and then like a FC or another 2-letter abbreviation. Just kind of stood out to me. Do you know what the AS stands for?
Yes, it is. I mean, I admit I had to look this up, but it conformed with what I thought. It was Association Sportive, which I know is not how you pronounce it in French, but I don't actually know how you pronounce it in French, so I'm not going to bother. But it's
I'm not going to even try to correct you. Yeah, I have no idea either.
It's the Sporting Association of Monaco, and what it refers to is the fact that they're a sporting club, like Sporting Club of Portugal. Right. But the idea is that it's a club that has competitive teams in a number of different sports. Soccer, so they are the Sports Association of Monaco Football Club, as opposed to the Sports Association of Monaco Basketball Club or Racing Club, or whatever whatever the sports they sponsor out of there. So that's the AS is the Association Sportive or Sportive or whatever it is. It's a Sports Association of Monaco, which is distinct from the Monegasque national team, which is also exists. Monaco, of course, is an independent nation, but a very tiny one, and it has this club, which makes sense for a country that's effectively a city. And the AS Monaco plays in Ligue 1, in the French league.
Right. Right. I remember you mentioning that before. Yeah.
And actually, they're one of the more successful ones. They're a relatively big name. And they have actually they went to the Champions League final in 2004. So they have some deep runs in Europe. They've had some. They've won the French league. I know, looking it up, 8 times. So which is a pretty good number. Certainly a quality club, and is one that can draw in. I mean, you think where they are, it helps to draw in some quality players, including a couple of recognizable names. I saw Takumi Minamino, who was a former Liverpool player from last season, and then the bigger one, he was hurt, so he wasn't playing. But Folarin Balogun, or Flo Balogun, who is the striker for the U.S. national team, and also former Arsenal Academy lad, has 2 appearances with the senior team.
Right. They mentioned his name during the course of this match, and I didn't know why. I was thinking, wait, is he back at Arsenal now? Because I knew that he had left. That makes sense. I didn't connect that. I didn't know why they were talking about him. Okay.
Yes, he is at Monaco, but he is hurt, so is not currently playing. That's why we wouldn't have seen him in the game. So. Right.
Okay, that's too bad. All right, so Everton.
We have to talk about Everton.
Yeah, the time has come.
Yeah. And you know what? It started pretty well, too, because, there's Gabriel. We haven't really mentioned it. Gabriel was still out in the Champions League, back on the back line, and, which put Timber on the right, Lewis Kelly starting on the left, and the defense, with Saliba, was talking to someone there and said, that could very well be what our backline looks like in a year and a starting backline is a year and a half from now.
Yeah.
It's not a crazy thing to think about.
Or at least as an alternate lineup, like if Ben White is hurt or something like that, right? I think Ben White still has a place at right back, but yeah.
Well, we've sort of talked about that. I kind of wonder, not that he's going to lose his position and, with injuries, it's always the idea that there's no such problem as having too many good players, because injuries happen, and you're always people worry, what are we going to do when so and so comes back, and we'll have all these players. This will work itself out. Something will happen, and it'll be fine. It'll be fine.
Yeah,
everyone, people will be able to play who we need to play. And watching this one, my impression was for probably about the first half hour. Certainly, we were good. We were really good.
Yes, and it's actually funny, as I looked for corroboration in my notes stop after the 29th minute for the rest of the first half. So, seconded.
Yeah, I mean, there are a couple of chances. Odegaard has a couple of really awkward misses. We have the corners. Yeah. I mean, Jordan Pickford is the number one for England, so he is a solid keeper. He gets made fun of a lot for having short arms, which we should point out that we have short arms for a keeper. Right. His wingspan still dwarfs ours, obviously, but he is relatively short arms as a keeper. But was definitely did a good job. Made a few saves and a few instances as well where you see a guy. Some of the shots we took, the ones that got on goal weren't as troubling to him. I mean, we should. Well, I guess we could talk about this now too. Remember that Everton did not play midweek because they are not in any European competition. Okay. And they also didn't play last weekend because of the storm that came through and knocked out their game against Liverpool.
Right.
So where Arsenal had, since Everton played their last game about a week and a half ago, Arsenal had played 2 other games.
Right.
Actually, three because they played. Right. Well, no, 2 games because they played the weekend and then the midweek, and they may have even played their midweek game after Everton's last game. So basically, in a sense, Everton comes in a much fresher position, and they're not going to be open and expansive, right? They're a Sean Dyche team. They're going to muck the game up. They're going to force you to do set pieces, but they're a big physical team, sort of in a lot of ways like Newcastle, right? Yes, we're a big physical team in Arsenal, but Everton is as well, and they're okay playing that kind of game. They're not going to panic seeing Havertz and Saliba and Gabriel and all of those guys in the box. Big, tall Marino was there. Big, tall guys in the box. It's not gonna frighten them in the same way. I mean, you remember Everton home was the finale last season.
Yeah,
and we struggled with them in that game. They're a hard team to play against. They're not. Don't overstate this. They're not very good. They'll almost certainly stay up, but like they're kind of hanging just the step above the relegation fight. They're not very good, but they can be a pain to play against. And they're one that first half hour you got to convert one of those chances.
Right.
You got to convert one because that opens the game up. And as we saw, and they were sort of like we talked about with Fulham last week, they were disciplined defensively. Everton was disciplined and basically just sat 10 men behind the ball the whole game. They had 2 opportunities going forward. They weren't really trying to score.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't say there's a criticism. Like, I understand what they're doing and they did very well with it. And that's a tough thing for us because we'll say things like, well, you got to be able to break them down. Yeah, but like it's designed to be difficult to break down, and then we just couldn't.
Mm-hmm. Basically, yeah. Yeah, this is another one of those matches where we just like completely dominated possession, and it didn't end up making that much of a difference, all things told. I mean, one thing I want to ask you about is we did have a lot more corner kicks against them than we did against Monaco. Mm-hmm. But as far as how they shut those down, I mean, some of it was Jordan Pickford just coming in like Raya would and just like catching the cross, deflating the situation some of the time, and definitely throughout my watching of this last night, I was cursing Pickford's name a lot. Like he was definitely across both teams the player of the match. Like you put another keeper in there, this game would look very, very different. But it also seemed like a lot of the time, other Everton outfield players were getting their heads on the ball instead of us. Are they, and it's tough for me to notice this, but like, are they a taller team like we've talked about Arsenal being? Is that part of it?
Yeah, they're going to be a taller, more physical team. Again, that's the manager Dyche. That's he was at Burnley for the longest time. Yeah, Everton. He was brought in to sort of help solidify Everton in the back defensively to help them avoid relegation, and that's what he did. He's doing what they paid him for. Yeah, they're going to be a physical team. It was a physical game, and I'm not going to. This is not a pivot to arguing about the referees. I thought the referee did a decent job. Whole game. But there was definitely a level of permissiveness. A lot was allowed to go. It was a physical game that was allowed to happen, and I don't have a problem with it in the sense of it was fine. I thought it was largely fairly officiated. I mean, we can nitpick one or two calls, but you can do that every week. But it is also worth pointing out, I think, that kind of game is going to favor a side like Everton, who wants to be able to be a little more physical. And, again, I think we can deal with it. I could definitely think of past Arsenal teams that would struggle with that and struggle. It would just look overmatched in those kind of settings. And that doesn't happen here. Although, we were starting to struggle, and I don't love getting super critical about subs, but I think it's very fair to point out the substitutions that were made, some of them maybe being necessary due to injuries, fatigue, all those other things. They clearly didn't have an impact on the game.
No, not, and certainly not to the same extent as against Monaco. I'd been reading one article that The Athletic had out this week, probably today or yesterday, certainly today or yesterday, talking about, why did he pull out Rice and Odegaard? That's a questionable thing to do. Apparently, Rice was complaining of some injury. Rice wanted to be taken off. And I think as far as bringing off Odegaard, he just basically said it was a gamble. Maybe Nwaneri comes in and makes a big difference, and maybe he doesn't. And you've just taken your captain out, and maybe you shouldn't have. But he felt like he had to try it because the lineup they had wasn't working, basically.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about how much we love Odegaard and how great he is. He wasn't particularly good on Saturday. He did not have a good game. You saw him misplacing passes. Supposedly, I'd heard that he's actually recently become a father, which, as I understand,
they mentioned that a week or two ago.
Yeah, as I understand it, does a little bit to your sleep cycle. Kind of gets rid of it.
Well, yes, for us mere mortals, I imagine someone in his position may not be as involved with the day-to-day getting up all night with the baby. I imagine they have a nanny or something, hopefully. But yeah, it could be the case.
I mean, if it's a newborn, you probably want a little bit of the time yourself too. Again, I cannot speak from experience on this point, but
we've seen no interviews on this topic with him.
Yeah, but you can see. I mean, they talk about again that the importance of sleep is a big thing in sort of athletic studies, but also again the fine margins. It doesn't take a lot when you disrupt someone's sleep cycle. It's not as if he's suddenly up all night and therefore not pulling all nighters, but anything that kind of disrupts you a little bit, especially with how many athletes, especially professional athletes, are such creatures of rigid habits. It can have an impact.
Yeah,
and 1 year for Odegaard. I mean, we haven't asked for it. I think a lot of people were saying no. We wanted to see 1 year with Odegaard, but I do think there was. I get it because there really isn't anybody else. I mean, as we said, there's really obviously no one else does what Odegaard does, but theoretically 1 year he's going to fit that kind of attacking role, and of course, again, because of his age and development, and because he's not Martin Odegaard, he's not there right now. And I thought he was. I didn't think any of the subs that were brought on were particularly did anything particularly helpful, I guess is a way to say it. Maybe I could lodge a defensive party or Trossard. But just looking at the subs there, Jorginho was Jorginho. He's not a guy who really changes the game for you. It's not really his role. Obviously, he comes in for Declan Rice, which is a very particular kind of position, and obviously we know about Rice's injury. 1 year he didn't do a whole lot. Gabriel Jesus, we talked about the confidence. Maybe he's building it in the Monaco game. I didn't see any of that here. a Party had a couple of times where he made runs forward, including one which I think we should probably talk about the penalty that wasn't.
Yeah.
And then Trossard comes on, and Trossard and Martinelli sort of seem to be in this position where neither one of them is really able to seize that starting left forward position, and they do just enough to tantalize, and then you just keep sort of wait, and then they'll have a game where they're just like, "What are you doing? You're better." Mm-hmm. Maybe they're not. I don't know, but it just felt like everything he tried, and this will happen sometimes, right? Arteta. There is a lot more guesswork into this than we want to believe, but I think Arteta is like, let's see what we need to change the game. Let's see something. It didn't change if it changed the game, it wasn't for the better.
No. I mean, so while we're on the topic of the subs, there's one thing I did want to ask you about, which is, he used up all 5 of our subs within roughly 15 minutes of each other. Mm-hmm. Like he kind of released them all around the same time. So it was in 3 groups, mm-hmm. right? So we had the initial double sub of Jorginho and Nwaneri on for Rice and Odegaard. Then we had another double sub of Jesus for Merino and Partey for Lewis Skelly. And then we had Trossard on for Martinelli. Mm-hmm. What I was wondering is, why might he have spread them out like 5-ish minutes apart from each other instead of just getting them all done at once? Like, what are the reasons for that? I have some ideas, but I wanted to hear what you thought.
Yeah, I don't think I think it's a case of each of them has its own explanation. I think in the case mm-hmm. of Rice, we talk about his injury. And so that's the one situation people usually think of with subs. Oh, if someone got hurt, you have to replace him. In case of emergency, here's Jorginho. I wonder with Odegaard too, since he's already making the sub on Rice, he's looking at Odegaard and saying, "Yeah, you need to come off too." In the case of Lewis Skelly, a few minutes later, I wonder if the decision's been made. He's only going to play a certain number of minutes, mm-hmm. and so Partey comes on, moves to the right back, Timber shifts over to the left side, and then with Jesus for Merino, it's at the same time, but at that point, you've already seen another few minutes of Arsenal sort of struggling and thinking, okay, I need to inject a little more of an offensive player in here as well. And then a few minutes after that, you have Trossard for Martinelli, which again could just be, all right, I got to do this now. This is when I have the opportunity. I'm going to make the sub when I get the chance. So I suspect each of them has a particular reason why they happen. The other thing you have to remember too is you get 5 subs in total, but you can only make them in 3, they're called windows, during a game. Well, really,
I had forgotten that. Okay.
Technically, it's 4, because if you make a sub at halftime, halftime's its own thing. Yeah. But during the course of the game, and we always think of this in the second half, but it counts in the first half too, especially if it's an injury sub. In the case of those subs, you basically get to make subs 3 times. Now, it can be up to 5 players total, but they can only happen in those, technically 4 if we got halftime, but those 4 windows that you create. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was interesting. They did come on fast. That is unusual to have that many substitutions in that quick a time. But again, I think a lot of them, it's not so much, it wasn't like a consciously planned decision. I think it was a case of some were planned, some weren't, and it's Arteta kind of not panicking per se, but trying to goose the process and this is an opportunity to make a change. Because we've been critical before, right? Of like, why are you making that sub in the 85th minute? Why not make it in the 75th minute? Well, he did. Yep. So you get what you asked for, I suppose.
Yeah. So let's talk about the penalty non-call. So this was a pretty severe clobbering of Partey from what it looked like from every angle that I saw it. The only justification I heard for it not being given was he got a piece of the ball, which, first of all, on the replays from every angle, I'm looking and I still didn't see it, that he did actually touch the ball. And if he did, it was like the tiniest bit. And then even assuming that he did, that still doesn't justify to me the level of contact on Partey.
getting the ball isn't that used to be the case. If a defender got the ball, they're like, yeah, well, it's fine. I mean, yes, he broke the man's leg, but I mean, he got the ball, so it's fine. No, that's not a mitigating circumstance anymore. That just being able to say, oh, I got the ball. Yeah, your back leg swept under him and took him out. I looked at that and I was watching the replay. There's a lot of contact, certainly, and I want the penalty called. I wasn't surprised they left it as is because I think you could argue that party's kind of already going down by the time contact is made.
Right. His feet were not under his center of gravity at that point. Yeah. He was like kind of at an angle. I can see what you're talking about.
Or I'll say this. I can certainly understand why in real time you wouldn't have called that because obviously we slow everything down and that's the replay and things look different when they don't go that fast. When I watched it in real time, it was kind of like, ooh, I want to see it, but I could see how at that speed, it does kind of look like Party kind of takes himself out. I don't think it's a dive. I think he just kind of like he slips. And especially also because they didn't call it a penalty on the field, I can't look at that replay and say to myself, oh yeah, that was definitely wrong. That's 100% a penalty. I can't say that.
Right.
And that's
not clear and obvious.
Not clear and obvious. And right, so you're into that circumstance then where the player, where the referee can say, yeah, no, I wasn't wrong, or it's not obvious that I was wrong, so we leave the call as is, which as we talked about, I think is a fine. Like as we said, I don't really have complaints about the officiating in the game. That's how you want the replays to go, minus of course getting the penalty, but it was quick, it was decisive. They had made the call on the field. They said, not enough. And then we play on. And that's kind of right. There was no long delay. They weren't slowing it down to the micrometer like we do sometimes with the offside stuff. Which I think too is sort of to call back to that previous VAR conversation from last week. I think that's part of the problem too, is offside lends itself to that kind of very specific thing. Whereas we said fouls can still be a bit of a gray area sometimes, and I think that one's firmly in the gray area. And while I don't like the results, I don't feel a grave injustice was done to us by not blowing the whistle.
Yeah.
That's my perspective.
Yeah, no, definitely. It bothered me a little bit, but I wasn't like outraged by it, I guess I would say. Yeah.
And we should say again, kudos to the referees. We saw yellows for time wasting and kicking the ball away, which was a pleasant surprise.
Exactly. I was about to bring us back there. Yes. I mean, Pickford just like punted the ball a good couple seconds after the whistle was blown, and obviously for that reason. And I was really, really hoping, because we usually see yellow cards for time wasting given to keepers. Like that is a normal thing. I don't even typically write it down anymore when it happens, because you just expect that in a match. But I was really, really hoping for him to do it again. Like just hold on to the ball too long and delay. And yeah.
I've once seen a second yellow for that, because that's the frustrating thing about it, is Pickford picks up the yellow for obvious time wasting, but it's his first card. And that's the thing. I can think of one instance in 30 years of watching the sport where I've actually seen them give a second yellow for time wasting. And what I'm thinking was, it was the 2012 Olympics. It was the women's knockout game. The Canadian keeper picked up a second yellow for time wasting against the U.S. allowed the U.S. to get a penalty, which I either tied the game and let them win it in extra time or in shootout, or was the winning goal, of a penalty on a yellow on a delay. And even that one was kind of like, that much of a delay? I don't know. But yeah, you won't see that kind of thing given as a second yellow, and it's frustrating because, okay, you gave him the yellow, and then he'll just keep doing it again. Now, again, all keepers do that. This isn't, this isn't some grave injustice. This is how the game gets played to a large extent. Again, I think the way to avoid that is to make sure we're doing the World Cup time thing, right? Like, let's just add it up, man. That's how you get rid of time wasting, is you just add the time back on at the end. You want to waste time, okay, and the game goes longer. We can do this.
Yeah.
But even then with Pickford, it was a delay of game, not in the way you usually see keepers delaying the game. It was the yellow for basically he kicked the ball away, which I have seen yellows given for before. And, what's frustrating isn't...
Not against other teams, typically only
I know. But I mean, I have seen that yellow given away. What's frustrating about it, if we think back to the yellows we got, I mean, you have the Trossard one, which is frustrating because of when he kicks the ball. It's like right after the whistle. Like, really? That's your delay of game. But as opposed to the funky one, of course, is the Rice one where it kind of rolls into the back of his leg and he kind of nudges it away. And that's where you're like, what are you talking about? That's not.
Mm-hmm.
So mostly I was frustrated because I see it in your notes, and I do remember it's a few minutes later when Broha got the where he picks up the ball and starts walking with it, and that's the kind of thing where you're like, listen, if you're going to penalize the Rice tap, what are we waiting for on this? And that was an obvious.
Right. The call was delayed on it. He did it, and it wasn't for until a little bit after that he pulled out the yellow card. Yeah.
Right. And that's the part of it that gets generally frustrating. But we say that, and I didn't see the circumstances, though I'm told they're pretty straightforward. Liverpool drew Fulham yesterday 2-2, twice coming from down a goal to tie, and doing that entirely with 10 men after Andy Robertson got a straight red in the first half.
Oh,
as I understand, apparently it was a pretty obvious red, is what they said. Like it was kind of violent. I think something like that. I didn't see the circumstances, but Liverpool fans weren't complaining about the injustice of the red. Let's put it as I saw it.
Okay,
at least no more than usual. But they, so. Again, some teams feel like some teams get to lead a charmed existence, and then we have games like this where we can dominate for a while, but not be able to get that play in. And some of that's just the fine margins of the sport. Some of it might also be, honestly, we've seen this with Liverpool in recent years too. We've had 2 straight seasons where we came so close, right? We went deep into the season in the title race last year, literally the final day of the season. And to come up short the way we did twice is mentally and emotionally draining. And then you throw in the Euros, and there is a certain amount of fatigue to the team. Like, you're hearing a lot of conversation about what are we going to do in January? We need a striker, we need a forward. And I don't know that that's wrong, but I also don't know if I look at this team and say to myself, is it a case of like we're missing a kind of player? I can think of kinds of players that would help us. But is it a case of we're missing a kind of player, or is there an extra gear that we just aren't able to get into because of what's happened over the last 2.5 years? Kind of 2 years plus this previous summer with the Euros. I mean, I wonder if there's a little bit of that too. And then you add in all of that, and then we talked about the 10 days of rest that Everton has coming into this game as opposed to the rest we didn't have, which again is just, that's how it goes, right? I mean, that extra game we played in midweek is the price we pay for being as good as we are. Everton didn't have a game in midweek. Why? Because they stunk last year. Like, they were really bad, and they don't get to they don't go to European competition right now. So, it's not so much that it's unfair, but it's something you have to deal with and work with. And, right now it does seem like we go through stretches where it gets to us. We talked about like going into the last international break, how we started to seem a little slow and drawn out. We got the break, came back, boom, we're off to the races, and now we're starting to muck up the works a little bit with some of the games we're playing. And some of it's the opposition. Fulham is a quality side. Everton plays a defensive game like this. You can see how it all plays out. But but yes, it's in the moment especially, it's been very frustrating to see us not be able to seem to score a lot of goals and then to suddenly not be able to score goals.
Yeah. On a later kind of side note before we pick our player of the week, so the commentators were mentioning the average age of Everton, I think, is the oldest in the league. It sounded like, I think that was what they said. It was something like that. And so it was kind of funny when they noted that Ashley Young, who Arsenal noted in their email yesterday morning, was kind of their player to watch from Everton. But so he's apparently 39 years old. So I think around your age, like a year older than me.
Yeah.
And
thanks for just
it's
telling
just funny
everyone
that
like right on the air like that. No,
Yeah, right. He was pointed out to be basically the oldest player on the field and the oldest player I'm aware of in the Premier League, if not the actual oldest, at least close to it. And it's just funny that happens to a player who is now, he has the last name Young.
Yes, of all the things. He's been in the league for a long time. He was spent a number of years at Aston Villa and Manchester United. Actually, it's most appearances with United. Played a season with Inter Milan, a few years at the Aston Villa at different points. Now he's been with Everton. So I have to say, I amuse this. I'm just going to send you this quickly. So this was a picture of him listed on his Wikipedia page, which shows him walking out onto the field, and the caption that is the best part. It says "Young, right?" with Aston Villa in 2008. We should point out the other person in the picture on the left is the mascot. It is a young girl whose hand he's holding to walk out of the field. And I just love that they had to make sure you knew which one was the professional soccer player and which one was the child. So that just amused me terribly. But yeah, Ashley Young's been around a long time. Again, yeah, the irony of him being named Young. But
yeah. I'll include that in the show notes for everyone, if anyone else wants to chuckle along with us. So, who is your player of the match?
The match or the week?
Or week match. I mean, yeah, this week you kind of, it's at your discretion.
Oh, okay. Well, no, I mean, we've always done week, so we're going to do week. I'm going to go with Bukayo Saka. Shout out to Miles Lewis-Skelly for getting a pair of starts, including the Champions League. But for me, it's Saka. The near hat trick in the Monaco game. I thought he was one of the more dangerous players, one of the more effective players in the Everton game, amongst the sea of guys who weren't as good. I thought he was the one who most likely to create some dangerous chances, got a few good corners whipped in. I thought he's overall, as I sort of mentioned, right, we seem to be a case where we're not scoring corners. It has to be Saka being brilliant. And he was brilliant against Monaco and not brilliant enough necessarily against Everton. It's frustrating that has to be what it takes, but he was the best player on the field for us, I think, in both games.
Yeah, and no argument on that. I think that he could have easily been my pick. He definitely, clearly the player of the match against Monaco. No argument there. When it comes to Everton, I don't think we really had a player of the match. I don't think there's only one person who stood out as being like the key player who at least came close to making things happen. I don't think anyone really deserves that. Like I said, it would kind of almost be Pickford. But I think overall, so if I were to try and pick someone different, which is what I typically will try to do, unless there's a compelling reason not to, it's almost a wash for Everton. Like that's kind of like not a factor in my decision. The next player who I would pick from the Monaco match would be Kai Havertz. I think that delightful play, putting pressure on the keeper, and then the technical goal, like again, we kind of talked about it, is kind of more of a Saka goal than a Havertz goal, but he got a toe on it and he got the credit for the goal. But overall, like that, I was so delighted, that made a strong impression on me, that putting pressure on the keeper and that goal that he generated in that way, that was pretty special. So he gets. I
would throw in a little bit. I mean, we did technically keep 2 clean sheets this week.
So what? Yeah.
And so I'd probably throw in. I think you could throw in Raya, especially the Everton game, because he had a couple of plays late in the game, and that's a tough place to be for a keeper, right? Talk about the mental game by being keeper, especially at a game like Everton, where so much of it is played on the other end of the field. And those rare times it comes to you, they had a corner late in the game, and that's like, oh, that's the gut punch. But Raya was there for that, and the defense handled it. But that could have easily gone. A couple of those could have easily gone another way on that one. So shout out to David Raya as well.
Yeah. Well, and we also got to see even more against Everton than we do in other matches, where him playing upfield, like where he's kind of, maybe 5 yards back from the midfield line, is kind of helping us keep the pressure on. Like he does it all the time, but we just don't see it as much because so much of the Everton match was played in their half.
Yeah.
All right, so what's up for next week? I'm a little concerned. I think you made a mistake. I'm seeing two Crystal Palace matches. What's the other one, actually?
Aha! This is one of those fun times where we play the same team consecutively. This happens now and again. But yes, we're doing the double with Crystal Palace this week. On Wednesday, we will be home in the Carabao Cup, the quarterfinals, which is good, going deep in a cup competition. That's what we want.
Yeah.
That'll be on Paramount Plus for you in the American audience. And then on Saturday, we go to, I almost said Stamford Bridge there, Selhurst Park. That's the Crystal Palace Stadium, which I know you were first introduced to as Nelson Road, the home of AFC Richmond of Ted Lasso fame. It's Selhurst Park, home of Crystal Palace. The Premier League away game on Saturday. That'll be on USA Network in the US.
Yeah. All right, well, thanks for joining us at Gooner U. If you're watching on YouTube, you can also listen to our show on Apple, Spotify, and some other places. If you're only listening, try watching us on YouTube with a link in the show notes. If you can, we'd appreciate it. Your homework for today is to write a comment, reply back to us, tell us whether you agree with us or disagree with us or something on one of our shorts or our main episode that you're listening to the conclusion of right now. We do record the show using Zencaster. If you'd like to try that platform out, you can support Gooner U by signing up using the link in the description, which also has links to everything we talked about and our social pages. Again, my name is Dove. You can find me on Twitter at Dove Frankel. With me, as always, is Keith, and you can find him in a pub watching Arsenal matches.
So come on, you Gunners.